USA CBMC's first story comes from Mark Whitacre, the CEO of CBMC USA.
Thank you. Ginger and I are honored and privileged to be here. This is our third time we've been at a KCBMC event. And every time we come here, we feel like family. I think we need to learn Korean, though. I think we need to work on that time. Thank you for having us. Great to be here. Well, I was so encouraged by Paul's story that he just shared. So encouraged by that. So I agree with him. Next time I hope that half the group are less than 30 years of age. So let's pray for that we reach the next generation and younger generation. What a very encouraging message that was. Thanks for the opportunity to share today. We're going to kind of follow up a little bit about what Paul was talking about the purpose of our life. What do you think about the purpose? What is the purpose of your life? What is the purpose of your job that you go to every day in the marketplace? What is the purpose of that? Do you know the answer to that question is the same? The purpose of your job in the marketplace, the purpose of your life is evangelism and discipleship. That's the purpose of our lives. And I'm going to share here tonight the impact of discipleship. And I'm going to show you examples. And I'm going to show you how important it is that we all be discipling somebody. We call it Paul and Timothy. Paul and Timothy. Paul, the mature believer, pouring into an unbeliever called the Timothy. Actually, for women, it's often called Naomi and Ruth. For women. That's what I'm going to talk about this evening. So I'm going to talk about the purpose of our life being discipleship. And then Victor Dawson tomorrow at 11:30 is going to be sharing the other purpose of your life, which is evangelism. And the two are connected. They're so interconnected, it's remarkable. And I think you'll see that as we share. Well, I'm going to start off with sharing an example of being an unbeliever. I was 32 years old at the time. I was not a believer in Jesus at the time. And I'm going to share about someone who reached out to me and planted a seed and poured into me and changed my life over 20 years ago. And I want to share that story. The company I was working with at the time is a company known as ADM, Archer Daniels Midland. Today, ADM is the 40th largest company in America and the 90th largest company in the world. When I joined them, we were the 56th largest company in America, $70 billion in revenue, and 30,000 employees when I joined them at age 32. That was 5 years ago, by the way, when I was 32. That was 30 years ago when I was 32. So I joined ADM. I was divisional president of the company at 32 years old. We had a 75-year-old CEO. We had a 69-year-old president. And I was number 4 executive out of 30,000 employees at age 32. I thought I was a rock star. I don't know how many of you know Bon Jovi, but I thought I was Bon Jovi. Back then. I actually had hair back then too. So that was my job at age 30. I didn't have God in my life. My life was all about how quick can I move up that corporate ladder. It was about pride, greed, materialism. I can relate to Paul describing that OCD, that over-comparison disorder. That's what I had, the over-comparison disorder during that time. I remember my first month at work, I got a corporate jet. That's the jet that I had during that time, 32 years old. The 7 top executives each got their own jet, and I had a Falcon 50 at age 32 for 8 years. Wow. Like I said, I thought I was Bon Jovi. My first month at work, there at ADM, I bought a mansion, a 13,000 square foot mansion with an 8-car garage. Well, what's a 32-year-old fool himself do with an 8-car garage? You fill it up. I had a Ferrari, 2 BMWs, 2 Mercedes. I had it all. The way the world would define success, I had it all at age 32. Me, a mansion and a corporate jet at age 32. Well, as I was getting obsessed with that life of greed and pride and materialism, my wife Ginger, who's also here, was getting obsessed with Jesus. She was in a women's Bible study. She started believing in Jesus about 10 years before me. She started pouring her life into Bible study. and pouring her life, getting to know Jesus in a personal relationship. She was being discipled by other women in a women's group. So as I was going to work, make as much money as I can as a selfish leader. I mean selfish. Ginger was becoming a servant leader at our church. And we were on two different tracks. So we were talking in 1992. This would have been 25, 26 years ago. And she said, Mark, we've got to change your life. She said, you're obsessed with the big house, all the money. She said, this is all going to be rust 20, 30, 40 years from now. All these cars. We've got to change your life. You've got to change. I said, Ginger, look what we have. Our kids are in private schools. We live in a mansion. I said, how can we change this? And she said, well, Mark, I think something's going on at ADM that you're not telling me about, because Ginger I've known almost my whole life. I met Ginger when we were in high school. She was in 7th grade and I was in 8th grade. She was 13 and I was 14 when I met her. We went to all our proms together. So she knew me well. And she could tell something that I was not telling her. Something I was holding back. And I shared with Ginger how ADM, now that they trusted me 3 years in the company, they were teaching me how to run an international cartel involved in price fixing, which is illegal. And I started sharing that with her, and she says, Mark, why would we do this? I said, Ginger, if I'm going to stay at this company, I have to do this. The people above me are teaching me how to do it. They've been doing it for 12 years. So if I'm going to stay at the company, I have to do this. She said, Mark, we should leave. You should have left and never got involved with this. And then she told me she was going to go back in her study and pray about it. We talk about it later. When she told me she was going to pray about it, I knew I was in trouble. She came back 2 hours later after praying about it on November 5th, 1992, and she said, Mark, I'm turning you into the FBI. I'm turning you into the authorities. I said, Ginger, if you turn me in, I could go to prison for price fixing. The CEO at ADM is a billionaire. He's close friends with President Clinton. They will come after us with everything they have. And she said, Mark, my CEO is bigger than your CEO. My CEO is God, is what she told me. And she said, God will protect us. And I've known her since she was 13. And I know she wasn't going to change her mind. I tried to change it for 2 hours. And after I tried to change it, we're sitting 4 hours with the FBI. The very day that I told Ginger a case that was going on for 12 years. So I shared with the FBI. Ginger was by my side, what was going on. The next day, in order for me not to be arrested, I have to wear a wire for the FBI. I was wired up by the FBI at 6 every morning for 3 years. 6 in the morning, they would shave my chest, they hook microphones to my chest, and I wore a wire for the FBI every day, 10 hours a day for 3 years. It was an interesting experience, especially if you don't know God, to go through that turmoil. I took the education that I had, full scholarship for 8 years of college. Went to Ohio State University for my bachelor's and master's degree, PhD in an Ivy League school in biochemistry at Cornell. 8 years when my parents didn't have to pay anything for my education. And I took that education and I didn't use it for God's purpose. I was using it for selfishness. I was using it how much money I can make, how big of a house can I get. Again, that over-comparison disorder, as Paul was describing. These international meetings for price fixing were in South Korea. They were in Japan. They were in Singapore. They were in Hong Kong. They were all around the world. And we had 2 or 3 meetings a month as I'm wearing a wire for the FBI. And following around the world with us was this green lamp. This green lamp had the video camera in it for the FBI. And this green lamp was in Seoul, Korea, where the FBI would work with the embassy and Interpol and make sure that they could get this legally into the meeting room, that this illegal activity was going on. Then it was at the Mandarin Hotel in Hong Kong. It was at the Shangri-La Hotel in Singapore. This green lamp was at 2 or 3 meetings a month with the same 11 guys for 3 years, 5 feet from him, with the video camera in it, capturing this crime. I look back now, I say, thank God we did not have a woman criminal among us. Because if we would have had a woman with us, I think the woman would have said, that green lamp is following us around the world. Because it was 5 feet from him. But I tell you what I learned is greed blinds you. They didn't see what was 5 feet from them because all they could see is the greed in their minds, the dollar signs. I was lost 60 pounds during the time I wore a wire. It was the most stressful period of my life. Almost every 3 or 4 months, I thought about killing myself and taking my own life. Wearing a wire 10 hours a day, when the FBI said these guys will kill you if they catch you, were the most stressful period of my life. And no doubt, those 3 years. And the amazing thing is, as I was wearing a wire for 3 years, the FBI gave me a deal of a lifetime. For the others are going to go to prison. 30 people were convicted, 30. 4 from ADM alone. The others are going to go to prison for years with all this evidence that we accumulated. I was only going to go like Martha Stewart, the exact same sentence, for 6 months. Deal of a lifetime. We're sitting with my lawyer. The FBI got a 6-month plea agreement for me. And my lawyer said, Mark, a deal of a lifetime. 6 months. Ginger said, Mark, sign it. Let's put this behind us. Let's get it over with. And I looked at Ginger and I said, Ginger, you got me in this mess in the first place. I'm going to do the opposite you want me to do. And I took that 6-month plea agreement and threw it in the trash can. And I took the case to court and got an 8.5-year sentence instead. And I would have had 6 months. I was my own worst enemy every step of the way. Boy, did I ever need a Paul in my life during that time. I was my own worst enemy every step of the way. Just like Martha Stewart, just like other companies like Enron and WorldCom and Tyco, I went from a corporate jet to prison. Now, in white-collar prisons, it's not like penitentiaries. It's not like it's razor wire. But you're still in prison. A big part of my sentence was on a Navy base. I'm on a Navy base working for the Navy for $20 a month. And you can't go home. So you're not behind fence, you're not behind wire, but you can't go home. And that's what I did for 8.5 years. Well, that's where the movie ended. There was a movie in 2009 called The Informant. That's myself and Ginger with my identical twin, Matt Damon. I think you can see why they chose Matt Damon. He and I look just alike. And that's where the movie ended. There's several books and documentaries on the case, 3 books. Against All Odds is sold in Christian bookstores. It's got the whole rest of the story, the faith journey, then a documentary and a movie. So it's a very high-profile case. If you go to the FBI Museum in D.C., it has all the equipment I wanted undercover in the museum in Washington, D.C. at the FBI. That's how big this case was. Well, the movie talks about everybody goes to prison and life's over. Well, did life end when I went to federal prison? I thought it was going to end. I thought it was coming to an end. But what I learned in this journey, it was just beginning. I was about 40 years old by that point after that trial. About 40 years old. And I want to share that journey. I literally tried to take my own life a few months before I went to prison. I couldn't imagine 8.5 years, even on a Navy base, for $20 a month. I couldn't imagine 8.5 years not able to go home. I couldn't imagine. And trying to take my own life. Well, this man, Ian House, read about it. He was a CFO of a large pharmaceutical company. He read about me in the newspaper. He was part of our group, CBMC USA. And in September 1997, 22 years ago, he showed up on my doorstep at my home 7 months before I had to show up to prison. And he said, Mark, the journey that you're ready to start, you're going to find your true purpose in your life. The journey you're ready to start, you're going to find your purpose in your life. And I told him in 7 months I'm going to prison. And he said, Mark, this is going to be the beginning of your life. I said, well, tell me more about that. What do you mean? And he had a study called Operation Timothy. How many of you ever heard of Operation Timothy? Operation Timothy is remarkable. Remarkable tool. I highly recommend all of you get familiar with it. He started spending every week on Operation Timothy with me. He usually would spend about an hour a week with somebody, but in 7 months, I was leaving for 8.5 years. So he spent 6, 7, 8 hours a week with me. Introduced me to God. Introduced me to Jesus. What is my purpose in my life? Is the Bible credible? Answering all those type of questions. And then my second week, when I was in a white-collar minimum security camp, my second week there, a man named Chuck Colson showed up. Chuck Colson was the White House counsel under President Nixon. He had an office right next to President Nixon's office. And then he went to prison for the Watergate scandal in the 1970s. He read about me in the newspaper my second week that I was in prison. He read about me. And he saw a lot of his own life and my life, that we both had this over-comparison disorder, and greed and pride, and focused on the wrong things, not finding our true purpose in our life. And he showed up, and he started following up with the same things that Ian Howells was teaching me about God and build my quiet time. And he became my second Paul in my life. Again, Paul-Timothy relationship. I was the Timothy, and Ian Howells and Chuck Colson were the Pauls. And the impact they had on my life was tremendous. Tremendous. I started, after 2 months after becoming a believer, I started asking God, I said, God, what can be the purpose of my life when I've got 8 years of prison yet to go? Once I surrendered my life to Jesus. And I looked at those Operation Timothy books, and I looked at that Bible, and I started taking, out of the 700 inmates, I started taking guys one-on-one through Operation Timothy. And over 8 years, I took 61 guys. Ginger had a chance to meet a lot of them herself during visiting time. I took 61 guys through Operation Timothy. Those 8 years became the most productive years of my life to disciple these guys. And I found my purpose in my life at $20 a month after earning $2 or $3 million a year for 8 years. And now I'm $20 a month for 8 years. I found my purpose in my life, which is discipleship. And I got hooked, and I got the same addiction I had for greed. I got the addiction for discipleship. And even still today, 21 years later, I'm always been discipled. I've got 4 Timothys now. Remarkable Timothys. Actually, one of the Timothys that I'm pouring into is the son-in-law of Steve Bay. Is a son-in-law of him. And what a blessing and remarkable young man he is. To pour into these young men where they get to know God. And they get to grow in their faith and mature in their faith. God bless me. My wife, most people would leave with a situation like that. Ginger and I celebrated 2 weeks ago our 40th anniversary. The miracle of God. The FBI agents today have become my biggest supporters. They're even trying to give me a presidential pardon under President Trump. My biggest supporters. When I got out of prison, the day after I got out, I was hired in the biotech industry. And I became the COO over 10 years of another large cancer research company. I became the COO. God blessed us. But I had to do it God's way and not my way. And I learned to go from a selfish leader in my 30s to a servant leader in my 40s and 50s and now 60s. It changed my life being discipled. And God did it. But God did it through guys like Ian Howells and Chuck Colson discipling me. I thank God every day for what they've done in my life. That's a picture of my family, closer and stronger than ever. A miracle of God that we made it through what we made it through. A miracle of God. Well, what do these two men have in common, Chuck Colson and Ian Howells? What do they have in common? Well, I tell you what they have in common. They believe the purpose of our life is discipleship. That's what they have in common. Chuck Colson passed 7 years ago at age 80. Ian Howells has still got 2 Timothys today. I think he's got over 100 Timothys he's had over the last 20, 30 years. He's still discipling guys. And Chuck Colson was until he passed 7 years ago. This man right here on this slide was the Paul of Ian Howells. Ian Howells was my Paul. Bill Fraser was the Paul who took Ian Howells through Operation Timothy. There's Ian Howells and myself together. 2 generations there. Where Bill Fraser discipled Ian Howells and Ian Howells discipled me. 2 generations right there. One of my Timothys out of the last 21 years of Timothys is my own son. He was 6 years old when that ADM case happened. He's 33 years old now. I took him through Operation Timothy at age 27. And now he's got his second set of 2 Timothys. And he's pouring into guys. And a lot of my Timothys are poured into, they became Pauls. Just in Cincinnati alone, in our own Connect 3 teams in Cincinnati, we got 4 generations right in our own teams. And there's some places around the country got 6, 7, 8 generations. Where Paul has a Timothy, that Timothy becomes a Paul, and it reproduces and reproduces God wants us to multiply. And Jesus showed us by example with the disciples he discipled. And of those disciples that he discipled, we are Christians today because of those disciples. Jesus showed us how, and he showed us why, and he showed us that the purpose of our life is to disciple. Nothing more important than that. That's what these men have in common. That discipleship is our purpose, and there is no better place for discipleship than the marketplace. You don't have to leave your job to get into ministry. Your job is ministry. You don't have to leave your job. That's what these guys have in common. So I really wanted tonight, God put on my heart, and I prayed a lot about the message I would have for you tonight about discipleship. And God put on my heart to really challenge you and have you pray yourself about reaching out to somebody at your job, in your neighborhood, someone that's in your sphere of influence, and reach out to them for them to be your Timothy, that you can be poured into them. When I mentioned about what God says about discipleship, where did the 12 disciples come from that Jesus discipled? They all came from the marketplace. They were all like us. Doctors, fishermen, tax collectors. They're like us in the marketplace. Well, when Jesus was finished discipling those 12 men, 12 people, where did they go back to? They went back to the marketplace. Peter's out on the Sea of Galilee. And now he's a fisherman still, but he's also a fisher of men. And he's discipling guys, and he's sharing the truth, and he's involved with evangelism and discipleship. He's talking about Jesus and sharing the truth and sharing the gospel. So they looked at their jobs differently after they were discipled by Jesus, and after they had the Holy Spirit in our hearts. Well, those disciples now are in heaven with Jesus. That means we are those disciples today. We are those disciples. Like Paul said, to reach this next generation, we're the ones that have to reach this next generation. We have to do it. God wants us to do it, and God commands us to do it. Two purposes of our life: evangelism and discipleship. And two scripture shows it. Matthew 28:19, when God told the disciples, go make disciples of all nations. And Victor's going to talk more about that tomorrow. As you go make disciples of all nations. That's going to be his focus tomorrow at 11:30. The other focus besides evangelism is discipleship. 2 Timothy 2:2, where Paul is discipling Timothy. And that's why we call him Paul and Timothy's. Paul is discipling Timothy. And he tells Timothy, take these things you've learned from me and go share with others. So you multiply. And like I said, my Timothy's then become Paul's. And that Timothy's become Paul's, and it multiplies. 4 generations, 5 generations, 8 generations. God commands us to do that. He expects us to do that. And I want to share with you, that is not just the purpose of CBMC USA, which is evangelism, discipleship. That is the purpose of our lives that God has commanded us to do, and He equips us to do, and it's what the Bible is all about, is to reach out to the lost and unconvinced through evangelism and discipleship. And what KCBMC does, what CBMC International does, what CBMC USA does, is help equip people to become the evangelists and the disciple makers that God designed us to be. And it's a way to become equipped. So I pray for all of you. Pray about it. Get engaged. Women have Naomi and Ruth. The men here be Paul and Timothy's. Go disciple. Go pour into someone else that doesn't know God. Go share the truth. Go share the gospel. I don't know where I would be if Ian Howes and Chuck Colson didn't reach out to me. And I thank God for disciple makers in this world. God bless all of you. Thanks for having me.